Imagine growing food on the same patch of land for hundreds of years, and the soil never wears out. That's not a fantasy. That's what many native and traditional farmers actually did, using a crop rotation trick we've almost completely forgotten. Today, we pour synthetic fertilizer onto tired fields and then wonder why yields drop, pests explode, and soil turns to dust. Meanwhile, indigenous farmers were quietly running one of the most advanced nutrient management systems on Earth, using nothing more than seeds, timing, and observation. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll see how their rotation logic worked so well that modern science is still trying to catch up. Let's start with a scene. Picture a native field centuries ago. No tractors, no chemical bags, no GPS. Just small mounds of earth, rows of plants, and people who knew their land like family. Corn stands tall, beans twist around the stalks, and broad squash leaves cover the ground like a living blanket. You might think, okay, nice garden. But what you're actually looking at is a living, breathing soil factory that recharges itself every season. And the secret isn't just what they planted together, but how they rotated that system over time. We usually talk about crop rotation in a very boring way. This year wheat, next year barley, then maybe leave it fallow. Medieval European farmers did that, rotating cereals and leaving land empty every few years so the soil could recover. It worked. Kind of. Yields improved compared to just hammering one crop non-stop, but they still had to sacrifice an entire year of production just to let the land rest. Indigenous farmers in the Americas and many traditional communities in Africa and Asia looked at the same problem and essentially said, why not make the soil recover while it's still working for us? Here's where the forgotten trick really starts. They stopped treating the field like a factory line and started treating it like an ecosystem. Different crops don't just take from the soil. Some give back, some protect, some clean up the mess others leave behind. The real genius was in the sequence. Plant a heavy feeder that pulls lots of nutrients, follow it with a generous giver that puts nutrients back, then cover the soil with plants that protect it from erosion and weeds. Rotate that pattern, and suddenly your field is regenerating itself instead of slowly dying. To really see it, we have to zoom into one of the most famous indigenous systems, the so-called Three Sisters: corn, beans, and squash. Most people have heard of it as companion planting, but very few realize it was also part of a wider rotational logic. Corn goes in first. It's a nutrient hog, especially for nitrogen, and it grows tall, forming the backbone of the system. A few weeks later, beans go in at the base of the corn. Beans belong to a family of plants that team up with special bacteria to pull nitrogen from the air and lock it into the soil, essentially refilling the pantry corn is trying to empty. Finally, squash goes in between the rows. Its big leaves shade the soil, trap moisture, and block weeds from even getting started. So in a single season, this field is doing three things at once: feeding people, feeding the soil, and protecting the ground surface. That alone is impressive. But here's the part we almost never talk about. After harvest, the story doesn't end. The roots of the beans and other legumes stay in the ground, slowly releasing nitrogen as they break down. The leftover squash vines and corn stalks are organic matter that decomposes into humus, building soil structure and water-holding capacity. And the next planting isn't just the same thing again. It's decided based on what the soil just went through. Imagine you're that farmer. One year, a part of your field carried the full Three Sisters system. It pulled a lot of energy out of the soil, but also fixed a lot of nitrogen and left behind tons of plant residue. The next year, you might not repeat the exact same trio on that exact same spot. You might shift to a crop that can capitalize on that nitrogen, like more corn or another heavy feeder, while moving beans and other legumes to a different area that's starting to get tired. That's the rotation logic. Heavy feeder follows nitrogen fixer. Ground cover crop follows erosion-prone crop. Different root depths take turns exploring different layers of the soil. Modern agronomy confirms why this works so well. When you grow the same crop over and over, you don't just deplete one nutrient. You build up a custom buffet for its favorite pests and diseases. Pathogens adapt to that one crop and explode. Weeds that love that crop's timing and light conditions take over, and your only answer becomes more chemicals every year. Traditional crop rotations break that pattern. Change the crop, and suddenly the specialized pest loses its host. The disease cycle is interrupted, and many weeds struggle to keep up with the shifting schedule. It's like changing the lock on your door every year. The old key no longer works. The Three Sisters isn't the only example. Farmers in what is now South Africa, India, and many other regions have long combined intercropping with rotation, mixing crops in a season, then changing the pattern the following year to keep soil quality high and harvests reliable. They don't just plant randomly. They test combinations, watch which crops thrive on which soils, then lock those observations into tradition. Over generations, this trial and error evolves into an unwritten rulebook. Don't follow this crop with that one. Always plant legumes after heavy feeders. Never leave the soil bare if you can help it. That rulebook is the real forgotten trick. Contrast that with European history. In the Middle Ages, a big innovation was the three-field system. One field with winter crops like wheat or rye, one with spring crops like barley and peas, and one left fallow, completely unplanted to recover. That was already a step up from the old two-field system, but it still meant that a third of the land produced nothing every year. Later, British farmers refined this into a 4-year rotation. Cereals 1 year, then root crops like turnips, then legumes like clover or peas, then back to cereals. The science was simple. Cereals drain, legumes refill, roots and forage feed animals and loosen the soil. What indigenous systems added was the idea that you can get some of those benefits at the same time in the same field, and then rotate that mixed system intelligently. Another layer of brilliance lies below the surface. Literally. Different crops send roots to different depths. Corn digs deep, beans explore the mid-layer, squash spreads shallow roots just under the surface. When you rotate what you grow, you rotate which part of the soil profile gets worked, aerated, and mined for nutrients. Compaction is reduced, channels for water and air remain open, and microbial life thrives in a more diverse environment. Think of it as rotating not just crops, but the entire underground workforce. 1 year, deep drilling roots open pathways. The next year, shallow feeders take advantage. The third year, a fibrous-rooted plant knits the soil together. And then there's water. Many indigenous fields were in places where rainfall could be unpredictable, either too much or too little. The Three Sisters system handled that by design. Squash leaves shade the soil, lowering temperature and evaporation. Corn breaks wind at the surface. Beans weave between them, adding more leaf cover. Over multiple seasons, rotating which sections carry this dense cover and which carry more open crops spreads the benefits of moisture conservation across the entire plot. That means more resilient harvests when the weather swings from wet to dry and back again. You might be wondering, if this is so powerful, why did we stop? The answer is productivity, at least on paper. When industrial agriculture ramped up, the goal shifted to maximizing yield of a single crop per hectare per year at almost any cost. Synthetic fertilizers promised a shortcut. Don't worry about the soil. Just add nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium from a bag and push the same crop every year. For a while, it worked. Yields rose, but the bill showed up later. Depleted organic matter, compacted soils, polluted water, and farming systems so fragile that if the fertilizer truck doesn't arrive, the whole operation collapses. Traditional rotations, by contrast, build resilience instead of dependence. Modern research is now circling back to what indigenous farmers already knew. Studies on local communities show that mixed cropping and crop rotation not only maintain soil quality, but also stabilize yields year after year without the need for massive chemical inputs. When legumes regularly appear in the rotation, they cut the need for synthetic nitrogen, reduce greenhouse gas emissions from fertilizer production, and often boost the yield of cereal crops that follow. Soil scientists talk about nutrient cycling, microbial diversity, and system resilience. But underneath the jargon, they're essentially validating a simple observation. When you rotate the right crops in the right order, the soil becomes self-healing. Here's a concrete example of how the forgotten trick might look over several years if we translate it into a modern garden or small farm. Year 1. A Three Sisters style plot. Corn, pole beans, squash together on one section. Elsewhere, a grain or vegetable mix suited to your climate. Year 2. That Three Sisters patch shifts, and in its old spot, you plant a heavy-feeding crop that prefers lots of nitrogen, maybe more corn, or a leafy green that loves rich soil, taking advantage of the bean's nitrogen legacy and the decomposed residue. Year 3. In that same spot, you go lighter, a root crop or a cover crop blend with more legumes to rebuild again, while the Three Sisters cycle continues rotating around your land. No bare soil. No identical crop on the same patch year after year. Everything moves. Everything recovers. Now zoom back to native communities. For them, this wasn't a hack or a productivity framework. It was a philosophy. Never let the soil do the same job 2 years in a row, and never leave it unprotected. Rotate givers with takers, protectors with producers, deep roots with shallow roots, and always think a season or two ahead. It's a moving puzzle that, when solved, turns a field into a self-renewing system instead of a mining operation. So the next time you see a bare, plowed field stretching to the horizon, ask yourself, is that really progress? Or is it a sign we've forgotten something essential? And if you're a grower, whether you're managing 1,000 acres or 10 pots on a balcony, what would it look like to bring even a little of this indigenous rotation logic back into your own soil? If you enjoyed uncovering this forgotten farming wisdom and you want more deep dives into old ideas that could shape the future of food, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who loves gardening or cares about the planet. Drop a comment telling me what crops you're growing this season and which ones you'd rotate next. I might use your garden as inspiration in a future episode.